Good morning and welcome to today's Writer in Residence session, where we are celebrating Fair Trade Fortnight. I'd like to introduce today our Writer in Residence, Christina Longden. Good morning, Chris.
Hello, hi everybody.
And I'd like to introduce Olivia, who's a librarian for Kirklees Council. Morning, Olivia.
Morning.
Hi, Olivia.
And I'd like to finally introduce our special guest, Bruce Crowther, the founder of the Fair Trade Towns in the UK and internationally. Hello,
Good morning,
Bruce.
everyone.
Good morning.
Hi.
Okay, so I'll now hand over to Chris to introduce the session.
Hello. Thank you, Nicola, for doing your wonderful job as usual. First of all, I will apologise if strange beeping noises keep happening because I think I've switched Microsoft Teams off, but I'm sure anybody out there with children homeschooling will know exactly how annoying it can be when you're getting constant messages about. So I think I've done it. If not, just bear with me and I will try and sort it out. Happy World Book Day to begin with. I don't know if you are aware, but today is World Book Day. So we are celebrating World Book Day with a fantastic person called Bruce Crowther, who I will shortly introduce more fully in a minute. And just also to say, we're also celebrating, we're at the back end now of Fair Trade Fortnight. So hopefully we've got lots of people watching the session today or on catch up who are big fans of fair trade and who want to find out a little bit more about it. So I'm going to start off, first of all, with a very short presentation on the writer side of what we're talking about today, really, of the differences between an autobiography and a memoir. And Nicola's going to pop up a couple of slides there for us, if you can, Nicola. And I will explain, as we're talking about life writing, that's the catch-all term really for what we're going to be discussing in a minute with Bruce, what he's done. So if you can move to the next slide, please, Nicola. I'm going to try and just very briefly, before we get Bruce on, explain the difference between autobiography and memoir. Now, an autobiography is an account of an entire life of somebody, the author who's writing the book, their entire story told by them. Often you find increasingly celebs who want to make a bit of money sort of do autobiography part 1, and then a few years later, part 2. It's usually chronological, so it tends to begin with when you were born, and it's usually written in the first or the third person if you want to get a bit fancy and write it from a it probably doesn't come across quite that well actually if it's in the third person, but some people have tried that. Now a memoir, a little bit different. This is your memories, so it's memories of specific incidents, specific events that were important to you and of significance to you in your life that you want to share with other people, and it gives you the time and the space really to explore in more detail these events of importance to you than in an autobiography, where yes, you know, some autobiographies sort of do tend to go off on one and get a bit tangential and a bit too detailed, but the memoir is a safer place to explore that really. And again, it's written mostly in the first person, which again makes it sound a little bit less formal as well. So the next slide, please. Just some prompts. So I am hoping today that some of you out there will say, you know, I've reached the old age of 30, so I'm now going to write my memoirs. And I'm hoping that some of you might go away and think, actually, do you know what? Bruce has done that. Yes, Bruce is phenomenal. We'll explain why Bruce is phenomenal in a minute. But Bruce has done this in particularly, and it's been on the boiler for a while. He'll tell you about that himself in a minute. But to get you started, if you want to get started, some prompts. First of all, think about your timeline. Are you going to write your autobiography or your memoirs strictly from birth to now? You're going to do it as episodes. So you might start with, you know, your teenage years, because that's the bit that really bears down on you the most, that you think about the most, and then maybe go back to your childhood. Or are you going to do flashbacks throughout time? And this is the great bit about writing, and in particular, if you're doing it as memoirs, there's no strict way of doing it. You know, it's your way of telling the story, and that's something that I've kind of been chatting with Bruce about recently with his approach to what he's done. You can also think about which characters. So you don't necessarily have to give exactly, for example, the same amount of time and headspace to your mum as to your dad or to your Auntie Ethel or your brother. It's about who are the significant people in your life, and what role are they going to play? Are they going to be a constant throughout? You mean a constant vacuum if, for example, you've lost your parent very early on in your life? You know, you can write it however you want, with whoever you want as the main characters. And there might be a theme. So there's a very strong theme in Bruce's, which tends to be in some of the stuff that I write as well, which is about justice, global justice, and you can set it around a theme that you like. You might want to set it in as a particular landscape, the part of the world that you're most at home with, that you're always drawn back to, that you found most inspiring. And a good start is, for any story, whether it's fiction or whether it's non-fiction, begin with a dramatic scene. That's a great tip for you to start with. So if you're struggling, you don't want to start with, I was born in Ashford Hospital in 19, whatever. Start with something dramatic. Right, next slide, please. So then you get to the process of reviewing it. So try not to be too hung up on how you are writing it or your grammar, that kind of thing. You get to the stage where, like Bruce is now, he's got a book and it is fab. And he's going to go back and he's going to review it, and he's going to get certain people that he knows and trusts, maybe the odd stranger, to read it, to see what they think. And think about your audience at this point. So you've written it, you've got it out of you, it is a book size or shape. And who is your audience? Who do you primarily want to read this book? But also, what are their expectations? Do they know a certain part of you? Do they not know this hidden part of you? That's particularly important when you've got this huge responsibility. I feel, I'm sure some will disagree with me, but when you've written something that's autobiographical, that's your memoirs, and you're mentioning real life people, you have a responsibility to not just how they are presented, but also your relationship with them in the future and how other people perceive them. The legalities, we could do an entire day on the legalities and the liabilities. So again, that's something you can find out easily online when you mention somebody, defamation of character, this kind of thing. That's where you want to look back and review after you've written it. But then also to maybe play around with some different techniques. Think about, what point of view have you been writing it from? Have you been writing it from your sister's point of view, from your point of view, from your ex-boyfriend's point of view? Think about, are you writing it through the voice of a child or an adult consistently? Because you might want to start your first chapters, if you're doing it chronologically, through the voice of a child. And then finally, just to say, be bold. Please don't fit the genre. So say you do love reading autobiography and you do love reading biographies and memoirs. You don't necessarily have to follow the way that other people have done it. Just feel what it likes when you're actually writing. And I've just picked out my favourite, which is Jeanette Winterson, who wrote Oranges Are Not the Only Fruits. And when she wrote it, I'm sure many of you have seen it as well, because it was a TV series. She was basically accused of, this is completely autobiographical, this is your life. And then she went back, I think it was 2012, and she wrote Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, which is the memoirs of that particular time in her life. And it's interesting how she also says women writers are often accused of this. Basically, that's your life dressed up as fiction, whereas it tends not to be aimed at men so much, male writers, as a criticism. So those are my favorites anyway. See what you think of them if you haven't read them already. So thank you very much. I've got my final slide, which will lead me right into Bruce, which is discuss, all autobiography is fiction. Is it? At the end of the day, it's our perspective on something. It won't ever be as objective as perhaps some people would like it to be. And I think that gives you more permission to be less harsh with yourself. Maybe not so much about facts, and maybe not so much about when other people are mentioned in your work, but in terms of expressing yourself. And with no further ado, I will go over to Bruce Crowther, founder of Fair Trade Towns, not just in the UK, but also internationally, who has now written this fantastic book, which I have had the privilege of seeing before most people, I think, and reading. And I've absolutely loved it. And I will just quickly read out. I wrote a list of things. Now, if you think, I'm sure you've all met people that you're thinking, I hope they do write their autobiography one day, because that will be fascinating. Bruce's is just, I wrote this list down yesterday, and it goes like this: Travel, Bob Geldof, Oxfam, Northern Ireland, Nicaragua, Cafe Direct Challenge, Vets, Quakers, Fair Trade Fortnight, 5 Goals, Thomas Clarkson, Abolition Slavery, Ghana, Stone Quarries, Rita and Haworth. And then it goes on and on. Fair Trade Way, Lorna Young and the Fig Tree, Joanne Harris. Every now and then we get the celeb mentions as well. Lebanon, Joe Cox, Black Lives Matters. And it takes us right up to Black Lives Matters, Brexit, and where we are now, which is fantastic. And Bruce said to me previously that if he had gone back and written this book a few years ago, he would have then had to rewrite it. And that is exactly what you've done, isn't it, Bruce? You stopped it and then you started again. So maybe you could just explain to us, to us why you did that and how that's worked out for you.
Well, thanks for that. So, thanks for the summary, Chris. I mean, that means that nobody needs to read it now, but you've summarised that perfectly well. So basically, how did the book come about? I mean, Garstang, my hometown of Garstown became the first fair trade town back in the year 2000. And straight after that, I was immediately taken aback by the interest. I was getting phone calls from Australia, news crews coming from Japan, and I couldn't believe the international interest. And I literally then traveled around the world telling what I called the Garstown story, the story about how Garstown became the first fair trade town. And with that, I often shared with people my anecdotes from my life and things that had inspired me. And people kept telling me, oh, you need to put that down in writing. You need to put it into a book. But I didn't take a lot of interest with that until I met with a lovely lady called Rachel Ward. I hope she might be listening in today, who was an activist in the Bristol area. And she convinced me that actually this was something I should think about doing. So in Christmas of 2006, I sat down to start writing the book about fair trade towns. But then it occurred to me, where does the fair trade town story start? When was the beginning of that story? Was my trip to sort of going off to Kenya with a magpie, winning a magpie competition in the year when I was 13 years old? Did that have an influence on my later years? And the answer to that, I thought, well, it did. So I started including my earlier life in it. And I started writing all this down, starting in 2006. Then at the end of 2009, I thought I'd pretty much finished now. I'd got to where I'd gone. There wasn't a great deal of interest in it, so the book just got shelved. And that was it. And in a way, I'm glad that I didn't do anything with it then, because after that, then I set up the Fig Tree in 2011. And a hell of a lot more things happened from 2011 up to today, which is now, of course, a part of the book. So the book became very much telling my life story. That wasn't how I set out to do it. It was about telling the story of fair trade towns and my campaigning, but it became telling my life story. But then I realized it wasn't an autobiography, and you've put that so well about the difference between an autobiography and a memoir, or it wasn't a diary, because a diary is like a factual record of events that actually as they happen. But this book, even though it is a factual account, I wouldn't call it fiction, although I see where you're getting with that. It's a factual account of my life, but the story is being told in order to inspire. It's not there as a history lesson to tell you this is how it all happened, even though it does contain those facts. It's there to inspire. And then last year, I attended a course at Lancaster University all about George Fox. George Fox was the person who founded the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers as we know. And it came up in there was criticism of Fox's journal, saying that it wasn't an accurate history of events. And it was pointed out that Fox's journal, like Quaker journals, was not meant to be an accurate history of events. It was meant to be written as an inspirational, aspirational piece of writing, written by the writer's own personal experience of the story that they were telling. And it suddenly hit me that as a Quaker myself, that this in actual fact was a Quaker journal, a modern day Quaker journal. And that's when I suddenly realized I should be calling it, not in my lifetime, a fair trade campaigner's journal, not an autobiography. Why not in my lifetime? That goes back to my days fighting against apartheid, when I was absolutely certain in my life that one day apartheid would come to an end, at a time when people saw no end to it at all. And I used to say, well, one day apartheid will come to an end, but it won't be in my lifetime. And now, of course, I'm delighted to say my children learn about apartheid in history lessons. Now I tend to say the same thing about world poverty. I'm sure that one day poverty will come to an end in this world, but I fear it might not be in my lifetime. So back over to you, Chris. Happy to discuss.
Thank you. That's a brilliant summary for everybody, I think, who will all be waiting for when the book comes out. The thing that really sprang out at me as well was the statistic that you said. I think we started off with in your campaigning years. It was, somewhere in the world, a small child dies from poverty every 2.5 seconds. And I think you said, didn't you, that might well not have changed particularly very much right now, but that's something you like to see, even if it isn't in your lifetime. Hopefully, there will be people watching that will feel inspired and be able to carry on and to campaign against global injustice as we see it in our own lifetimes. I think I said to you before, just in the pre-chat before we came on camera, I'm really glad you're not much older than you are, Bruce, because I'm not quite sure how much more you could have packed into that memoir. It was fantastic, and I love the fact that you've said you brought out the Quaker connections there, which is something that both you and I have in common. It is. I think what tends to happen with history, and when you're writing a piece of non-fiction, you tend to be so obsessed. That's why I put the little prompt on about autobiography being, all fiction. This is the way it is. We have to be objective. We have to be scientific. Where's the evidence for this? That's the narrative we hear all day, every day at the moment with everything. Rather than what are the gut feelings? Where did this come from? Who was my influencer? And I love the fact, because reading what you've written here from such human and such an honest perspective, the struggles you've had yourself, the things that you've faced in life, I draw so much more out of that as a reader than somebody that just decided to write the history of the fair trade towns movements, in Britain and in the world. So thank you for that, because I think you will really move people in the way that you've written about things. And you and I met, interestingly, a lot of the key events that happened in your book. I was living in Southern Africa at the time, and it was after that I came back and we met through my work with the Lorna Young Foundation and the fair trade movement in general, and Cafe Direct. So it was great to see those mentions very early on in the book, and you were on board with it. It's like, so you didn't seem to sit around and wait for anybody to say to you, this is the right thing to do. You just knew it was the right thing to do, and you knew it was the right thing to challenge, as Lorna Young herself did with the supermarkets, getting fair trade products consumed, used in churches, in cafes, in towns, and you never seemed to sort of get too bogged down in the detail of it. You just did it. And there's a lovely quote in the book, I can't quite remember it off the top of my head, but it was something about when you were campaigning with Oxfam, there were people you felt quite disappointed, as those of us who are activists often feel disappointed when somebody doesn't turn up to a meeting, and somebody important is decided to turn up and speak at the meeting. And you kind of said, and I just wonder whether your view has changed on this, that presence and not just chucking money into a charity box is more important. I just wondered how you felt. How do you feel about that now these days?
What action more than giving money to charity?
Yeah, deeds not words, isn't it, in a way?
Absolutely. I mean, that was very much where the Fair Trade Towns movement came from. When we had that meal in the beginning to try and get people interested in fair trade, we invited all the people in Garstang, the community, to a meal. And it was important, even though we were the Oxfam group, we had no money to give. We gave those people the meal. And we also, very importantly, didn't have collection boxes for people to put money into the box. Because we felt, and I felt strongly at that time and still feel strongly today, that all too often people put money into a box and then they've almost paid for their guilt. It's almost like a tithe, isn't it? They put money in the box. Oh, that's okay now. I can relax. I don't feel bad about the world, because I've done my bit. And that's not enough. It's not enough to keep putting money. Of course, we need the charity. Of course, we need the money. We need to help the situation now. But we have to change the way it is. And that's not going to be done by just keep putting money into a tin. That's got to be done by actions.
And I think you proved more than most people that, your actions have taken you. Interestingly, what I didn't know about your life before reading the book, how much traveling you'd done really before you got involved in the fair trade movement. And I think a lot of us, I came from completely the opposite, I suppose, not background so much, but perspective. I never wanted to travel. I was never interested in traveling. I felt we had enough socio-economic problems in Britain as it is, and I'm going to sort them out here. And then I ended up in Africa, like you do. So I kind of came about it a little bit of a different story to yours. And I was reading, and I felt for the first time ever, I felt really wistful and really not jealous, but just thinking, oh, I wish I'd done that a bit more. Obviously now with everything that's happening in the world, I don't think any of us are planning to travel in the foreseeable future, certainly not over great distances. But do you think that is particularly what shaped you, perhaps more than your family background, your experience of travel?
That's a good question. I would say yes, without really being aware of that. But again, in writing the book, I became more aware of that. But going right back again to that trip to Africa when I was 13 years old,
Wow.
I never realised the impact that had on me, but it obviously did. And then even just moving over to Ireland, into Northern Ireland, that was my
Yeah.
taste of a different culture, a different way of thinking. And really, the trip to Nicaragua, that was because I'd read a book from Oxfam, couldn't believe what I'd read, and just like the old John Lennon thing, I wanted to go over there and see for myself exactly what was happening, which was a bit scary, but one hell of an adventure.
I think, I mean, I found that very powerful, all your descriptions of your travels, but then how you then started picking up on the situation in each country. And, you and I are both interested in politics with a small p, and how you translated that back into making, and you've always been the person that I've known. If you see something happening in a town overseas that you're connected with, you want to change it, you want to affect it, you want people here to know about it. And I think that there seems to be, that's the difference between you and maybe your average other person, which is most people will go, oh yeah, there's probably a charity that helps that, I'll look them out. You're kind of going, well, yeah, there might well be a charity that helps it, but what can we do, and how can I raise awareness here? And I think that's what's fantastic about your book, is you've done this wonderful thing, which I perhaps should have mentioned before in the slides, which is rather than tell. This is not a preachy book. You are not going to read this book and suddenly be converted to the way that Bruce sees the world. But you're going to read this book and you're going to go, oh right, okay, wow, I get how and why he's done that, because you've shown and not told. And I think that's the sign of a really good writer, particularly if you're writing a journal or your memoirs. You've clearly put so much. Well, have you put thought into it? Because it looks like you've thought it out really well, but it just flows so naturally that you don't feel that you have to convince people, and you don't feel that you have to, I suppose, convert people to your way of thinking.
Yep, yeah. I mean, the flowing bit is quite interesting because, as I said, I never see myself as a writer. I still don't. And it's funny because we're moving house at the moment, and after I'd finished the book, I came across, in clearing up, a poem about writing, and it says something like, "If it doesn't flow, don't do it." And I was quite pleased because, for me, it wasn't difficult in a way. Yes, there was difficult parts of it, but it flowed, and that's what I felt. For me, it was just easy. It just came out in the way of just talking to you, or in the way I used to talk about giving anecdotes. It was just a collection of those anecdotes, and that's how it was. And it was almost a great relief to be able to put them onto paper and offload them and think, it doesn't matter what happens to me now, it's there in writing.
I think, I mean, that's come across very evidently to me. Bruce, you actually look like you're bathed in holy light at the moment. It looks like,
I'm in the conservatory, and I did say before that the light bulb, but the sun's just suddenly started to shine.
It's a little halo. That's fantastic. I just wondered whether, for that, I mean, I'm sure there would be people here who, right back at the beginning of the Fair Trade movement, and as you said, even before the Fair Trade Foundation and the systems and the certification systems that we have today, the various ethical trading products and ways of working, even before then, there were always fair trade shops, weren't there? And there were ethically minded shops, tradecraft, and sort of growing up in the 70s and the 80s, I was aware that there were these shops that you went to if you cared about things. And then I wasn't in the country, like I say, at the time when things really took off massively. And just before that, could you maybe paint a little picture for us about how it felt at the time when the fair trade products were sort of finally getting into shops and were becoming more mainstream? There seemed to be such an army of people involved in this, and people like, I will mention Rita Verity, who I know very well, from Haworth. Big up for Yorkshire there, because you're Lancashire and I am originally, but big up for Yorkshire and Fair Trade Yorkshire. But they were just like you were doing, just taking the world by storm. We're gonna do it. The first twinning town with Machu Picchu. They just did it. And I can pick that up from the book, and I've picked it up from knowing you and moving back to the country and getting involved in things. I just wondered if you could maybe explain how it felt to be part of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing with becoming the first Fair Trade town and going around. I had this wonderful job of going off to Japan to meet young people in Japan who were feeling frustrated that they couldn't get their message across. And I could relate to that so much. And that's, again, one reason why I wanted to put this into the book.
Yes.
The book is full of these wonderful people like Rita in Harrow, Stoller in Norway, Shoko in Japan, Elizabeth in media. They're all over the world. These amazing, wonderful people, these pioneers who just see the world, don't like what they see, and they want to change it, and they'll do whatever they can to change it. They know it's the right thing to be doing, and that's what very much the book, I mean, that's what I want to dedicate to those people. The book wants to be I want to dedicate it to those people. And yes, in those early days with Fair Trade, it was really difficult. I mean, I remember drinking Nicaraguan egg cafe coffee. It was absolutely, as a student, and it was absolutely disgusting. I realize now that why nobody came to my room for coffee. I do now blame the coffee, whereas at the time I had a bit of a thing about it.
Very different now.
but then of course it changed. I remember when we became a Fair Trade town, Tony Robinson, the comedy actor, he came to Garstang and he said when I asked my son what does Fair Trade mean to him, he said crap chocolate wrapped in cardboard. And that's what Fair Trade used to mean to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But then with the Fair Trade mark, with Cafe Direct, with Divine Chocolate and all these people coming in, it suddenly changed. It became a product that was good quality. It wasn't more expensive anymore. And we had a certification label to show that it was fair trade. And what that did was change this movement of pioneers, these great people, which we can never forget. We owe everything to those people. But it changed it to become mainstream, so that ordinary people who didn't care two hoots about poverty or fair trade or politics go into the supermarket could buy a fair trade product, which was the same price, as good quality, if not better. And yet they could actually do something to change the world without actually making any effort. And that was the major change for me. Yeah. When Nestle got the first fair trade mark on it and people started complaining, well, that's what it was about. Really, it was about making it mainstream so that people at Nestle could have a fair trade product. It doesn't certainly mean that people like me or Rita are suddenly going to go out and buy Nestle products. We're still going to buy the Divines and all these wonderful products of the past. But it was making it possible for everybody in the world to change the world, not just the pioneers.
Yeah, and that's obviously something that has changed massively in the last 20 years. I've seen that happen. But there are also, obviously, I could do with a 5-hour session because there's so much to talk about. And I know Olivia and Nicola want to come in and ask a few questions in a minute as well. But there is so much that you've achieved, and even just the fair trade, in terms of the fair trade certification, process, in terms of all your work with the Fair Trade Towns movement. But you've done other things that I won't call spin-offs. Let's call them spin-offs. The Fair Trade Way. Tell us about the Fair Trade Way for those of us in the north of England.
I think spin-offs are a good word. I mean, these are ideas. I remember when I worked for the Fair Trade Foundation, going into meetings and being told to think outside the box. And I really struggled. With that. Going into a meeting and being told to think outside the box was something I couldn't do because, to my mind, ideas come to me in the shower or in the middle of the night when you wake up in the middle of the night. You can't. I would think it's like writing. You can't sit down and say, I'm now going to write a book. I don't know, because I'm not a writer.
Not me.
But it comes to you. It either comes to you or it doesn't come to you. And when it does come to you, it's and again, I touch on this in the book about my spiritual beliefs. It comes to you like something you can't ignore.
Yes.
So the Fair Trade Way came to me in the shower when I was coming up to being 50, and I'd read about these monks in Tibetan monks or whatever it was, who when they were 50, they decided they would just go on a walk and walk around the world or just go somewhere. And they wouldn't take any money, they wouldn't take any property, they would just walk and rely on the kindness of people. So I had this idea to walk from Garstang to Chester. Chester was the first fair trade city, Garstang the first fair trade town. Not take any money. It sounds a bit Yorkshire, that Yorkshire upbringing. And just rely on the kindness of fair trade campaigners. So I'd go to Preston, meet up the fair trade group, sleep on a sofa, and just go to Chester. And then my friend, who's a rambler, he's a walker. I'm not a great walker, and he said, "Well, why?" Forgive me for the people between here and Chester, but why walk from Garston to Chester? It'd be a lot nicer to go north and go to Keswick. So we decided to walk from Garston to Keswick, calling at fair trade towns and stopping with fair trade campaigners and fair trade towns along the way. And we decided we would eat only fair trade products. We would stay only at fair trade accommodation. And at that time, then it became possible to do this and live a fair trade life, a fair trade way. So the fair trade way was invented as that. It was possible to live a fair trade way, to live a fair trade life. Our dream was to actually extend the fair trade way to go right across England and Scotland. And we've had branches of the fair trade way. We've got fair trade ways now, sort of in Japan, in Lebanon, in Yorkshire, in Wales, in Scotland. So people have developed their own fair trade ways, but the original one goes from Garstang to Keswick.
I think that's wonderful, and I think that's what people are very much looking for at the moment. When you, at the moment, it feels like everything's kind of stopped, and people that were perhaps doing the kind of activism or awareness raising work that they did previously about injustice in the UK and overseas, everything feels it's on hold and you can't do anything anymore. But I think maybe it's a time to sit back, and this is why I think your book is going to be so well received, because it gave me, I've been involved in a lot of this stuff, to sit back and go, wow, that happened, and this is how it happened, and it can happen again, and we need to make sure that this is not forgotten. And what I love in particular is, as somebody that I love maps, and I love the geography. I love how you always draw everything back to the geography of the world, and often there's a reason. That's why there's gross injustice in the world in terms of the gap between the rich and the poor, for example. But you did this with the fig tree as well, and you drew on your work with Ghana, with the cocoa growers in Ghana. You're also, I must add here, Bruce is a sub chief. He's a proper chief in Ghana. They made him. There's a proper ceremony.
Hence the shirt.
Hence the shirt. Yeah, he is a chief. And you looked at the slavery triangle, didn't you? And I thought that was fantastic. So you teamed up with, it was basically, wasn't it? It was Lancaster, Ghana, and Pennsylvania. And again, you've just drawn somebody's attention immediately now to the geography there, and in terms of the injustice in the world, the Black Lives Matters movement, and all of the issues that we've been discussing recently. So much of this comes down to geography and people's lack of knowledge of why certain groups of people are there, why they're not there, and I love that about the work that you've done. And you just kind of slip into that naturally in the book, and that kind of brings us to the fig tree, really, which not that we're sort of skating past a zillion and one of the but the fig tree. Olivia, if you can just put the little banner up there that gives people the website details of the Fair Trade Centre, otherwise known as the Fig Tree, which Bruce is the founder of. If you can maybe explain, I mean, there's entire chapters in the book on this, isn't there? But this is where your heart is at the moment, isn't it?
I mean, the fig tree, our link with Ghana, the Fair Trade Triangle, that's about 3 or 4 hours in itself. But because you were the inspiration behind the fig tree, Christina, you were the one that dropped the seed in that one.
I was the mad person outside the shower going, Bruce, I think you should do this.
And it was your dream to see, you felt we needed in this country a place to talk about the injustices, talk about global injustices. And crazily, as it was at the time, you said it should be in Garstang. And I thought, you must be mad, we had all sorts of problems. I mean, Garstang is not the most forward-thinking town in the world, I have to say. And it was not easy, but we decided to go ahead with it. We built this Fair Trade Centre in Garstang. It was there for 3 years. And it was an international centre to promote all the global, to talk about the global injustices in the world. We developed a link with Ghana back in the year 2000, and then we started. Mainly, we did a project which took young people to Ghana to look at the slave trade and fair trade. with Lancaster nearby to Garstang being a slave trade port and Ghana being where the slaves are from. And at first the connection was simple, a bad trading system, a good trading system, historical, modern, but then the connections became much deeper than that. Again, this is a whole chapter or more than that in the book. And that developed our link with Ghana. So the fig tree became based on that link with Ghana. It started talking about the heritage of the slave trade in Lancaster, particularly looking at the abolitionists and why did they suddenly fight against the slave trade at a time when it was so acceptable and so normal to people. And that's really what the fig tree became. It became a heritage center then, as much as anything else, talking about the heritage and then starting to look at these great people like Thomas Clarkson, the abolitionists, who were so forward thinking. And those people are still around. We still have people like that today who realize that what's happening in the world today is wrong and they're doing something about it. It's very easy now. We look back at the slave trade. We can see how wrong that was. Simple. But are there things we're doing today that in 200 years' time, people will look back at us and say, God, that was so wrong. Why did people not do anything about it? And that's really what we do with the fig tree. We do children's workshops on that theme. And we started making chocolate, which is fantastic.
Have you got some there? Have you got some there to show us, please?
I have, yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. We have a range of, these are 40-gram bars, which we do in milk.
Gorgeous. We
call it dark milk because it has more cocoa in it than most milk chocolate. We have dark, we have orange, we have mint. Then we have the 100-gram bars, which are mainly vegan. We have our white almond milk chocolate, which is absolutely fabulous. So it's all vegan, but it gives it an almond texture. We've got dark with raspberry, cherry. And then we have our little shapes, which I enjoy doing. We have some little cats there. And these
are. I mean, there is nothing better to teach children about the process of trade and the supply chain than chocolate. That's, people in the fair trade movement know this already, but those of you that don't, I mean, the bottom line is, you're teaching a child about how to create a product, how many different components there are in a product, where it originally comes from, how difficult it is to get that product from here to here without many people being exploited with the supply chain. And that's exactly what you're doing. So at the same time, you're talking children and young people through slavery, exploitation within the supply chain, and the questions that, we should continuously be asking, has it got the fair trade mark? If it hasn't, that doesn't necessarily mean it isn't unfairly traded, but what questions do we need to ask about where these products come from? And it's becoming harder and harder, isn't it, as consumers, to ask these questions. But you can't just give up and say, well, I don't know, it just comes through the post box. You've got to hold people to account and educate yourself and educate young people in particular. And that's what I've done with a video for Kirkley. If you look on kirkleyslibraries.co.uk, there's a children and young people section. I've just done a quick 10-15 minutes video on what is fair trade and what is unfair and what is fair. But I think the videos are great and reading stuff online is great, but there's nothing better than actually speaking to somebody like you who can give stories of having seen with their own eyes what is going on. And I think that's a good point to pause now and to bring Olivia and Nicola in, because I know that they've got some questions to ask you as well.
Wow, that's amazing, Bruce. You've done everything.
There's lots more.
We've got some comments that have come through. So before we go on to the questions, I thought I'd show a few of these. I can confirm that the chocolate is scrumptious. And lots of people looking forward to the book. Looking forward to reading the book. It's so important to make the storytelling personal. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of lovely comments. Really good. Okay, Olivia, do you want to do your first question?
Well, just sort of on the back of that, talking about the book, I was really interested in what Chris, what you were saying about when you start a biography or an autobiography or a memoir, you can actually write through the eyes of a child and then actually sort of get older as you get older in the book. Yeah. I was just wondering, Bruce, if you had done that. So when you start your book, have you written it sort of in the way you speak now, or have you sort of written it through the eyes of you as a 13-year-old boy winning that competition?
That's a really interesting question, but it's something I've not really thought about. I mean, I didn't think about the writing. It just came out. But the book starts, funny enough, I mean, because this wasn't deliberate, it wasn't thought out. Again, it's like strategies. I never developed strategies, things just happen. But the beginning of the book is actually about my experiences on Wendover Station, where I was born, and being frightened of steam engines. And that very much is a perspective of me as a child being frightened of steam engines. I love steam engines now, absolutely adore them. And it goes into that connection between how I changed from being so scared of these things and then understanding what they were about and then loving them. And maybe that's true about world with racism. Hatred is so much hatred is because we don't understand things that other people are doing. And you get this hatred, and what was it Yoda once said? Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hatred, or hatred. Yeah, great quote from Yoda. One of my favorite. But that original fear is, I think, comes from misunderstanding. So in a way, that's where the book started. I'm not quite sure why it started like that. That was in 2006, but that's interesting. Maybe if you to analyze it, you see, that's what you'd say is I was taking on my child, but it wasn't deliberate.
I'm glad you've asked that question, because I picked up the very same the first time I read that chapter. I thought, well, why has he started off with that? I think that's something really. There's a real subconscious thing there, but you're at your review stage now, so you need to go back and review all of these things. and I think that needs to, I think that needs to be a feature, because you've clearly addressed that in a very interesting way, I think.
Okay.
Any more questions?
This comment up, Nicola, that's just come in because it ties in with that. Somebody's very keen to know when it's coming out. When can we actually get our hands on it, Bruce?
I've got no idea. Absolutely no idea. The book was never written to be a moneymaker or to be anything like. I just wanted to share the story, particularly with the campaigners around the globe. And now it's there. I feel my job's done. I mean, I get a bit fearful about the idea of reviewing it and anything else, but I feel like now I've done my job. I can sit down and relax and just hand it over. Let people do with it what they want to do with it. But. I would love it to be published. I'd love it to actually have a book in my hand, a hard copy. I would love it to make money for causes. So, be able to donate the money to the Fig Tree, Lorna Young Foundation, Oxfam, if it was able to do that. But I have no idea where we go from here.
I think that's what makes you that makes you Bruce, because so many people would already have, I'm doing it this way, I'm doing it that way, it's going to be that way. You've sat on this for a long time, and then you've come back to it, which I think makes it a fantastic piece of work for those very reasons. And we were just saying before, you could sit in it for another 10 years and you probably, the book will go on forever, but at some point you have to get it out there. And I think you're quite right. I think just to sit and to now pass it on to somebody, and then to have that decision how you're going to have it published, because I think you are one of the few people who is a writer who can actually have that decision, because it's such a good book, and everybody in the Fair Trade movement knows who you are, and we're all desperate for it to be out there. Now I think if there's anybody out there watching who wants to publish this book, please do, because you'd be crazy not to, because he's a great writer and he's a fantastic storyteller. But I think that book now has to get out there and to be seen, and I think you've almost done your waiting period, haven't you? You've done the pregnancy bit for about 10 years. So now it needs to be out there and to be seen. So, I mean, it's the practical steps now, isn't it? And that is a great question, Sabina. And Sabina, I should add as well, is a fantastic pioneer. She just took so much on in the Middle East herself, didn't she? And you helped her very much. She hasn't said that, but I'll just put that out there, because you helped her a lot.
But I mean, the book, again, I want to dedicate it to people like Sabina, these amazing people around the world living in such difficult circumstances sometimes. And then Sabina's going in Dubai into schools to teach children about fair trade. I mean, how amazing is that? How absolutely amazing is that? I mean, incredible.
And nobody's paying her to do it. She's just doing it because,
absolutely,
like all volunteers, we do these things because we believe in them. And we see how they change people's lives. So, great question. Let's get the book out, Bruce.
We've had quite a few people on here volunteering, haven't we, Nicola? There's Professor Ulysses Ferreira volunteering. I'm not sure where Professor Ulysses is at the minute, but he's supporting.
He's from Brazil.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is this someone that you know, Bruce?
Yes, he's from Brazil. Yeah.
Got some global viewers. That's fantastic. Well done.
And then we've got from Huddersfield, we've got Tina. She actually used to work with us, didn't she, Nicola? And she's been
Yes.
Fair Trade as a volunteer. So you can get involved here as well, can't you?
It's amazing how many people you speak to, Bruce, and who were doing this quietly and just getting on with it. And then, so I tend to, in my work, I tend to meet people who are like you, who are very, very, knowledgeable about this. And then people who are just quietly out there doing it and are also very knowledgeable. And then a whole massive lot of the population who have no idea what fair trade is. And these days, I'll probably go, isn't that to do with Brexit? And and so there is still so much work to be done in the world of fair trade, and I think your book will help.
Just on that point about being knowledgeable, I mean, that's interesting because I'm not ashamed to admit, I mean, 20 years ago, I couldn't even point to Ghana on a map.
Yeah.
If you told me where Ghana was, I couldn't even show you on a map. And now I've been on this journey where I'm now proud to be a sub-chief in the village. I've got friends who are cocoa farmers. I make chocolate out of Frederick's and Patricia's cocoa. How fantastic is that? Absolutely amazing. And it's a journey I've been on. But when I think about it, I think, well, in the beginning, I knew nothing about fair trade. I knew nothing about Oxfam. I knew nothing about global poverty. And I've learned all that. And it's a journey which I would just want everybody to go on. I mean, one, it's fun as much as anything else. It's great fun. But a journey to learn about what's happening in the world and then to do something about changing it. And if everybody could go on that journey, wouldn't the world be a wonderful place?
It would. And actually, now it's more easy now than ever to do that because of the information that we have. We don't have to go off to a library and look at an encyclopedia like I did when I was growing up. It's there in front of us. If anything, we're just blinded by too much information. But I think that's a really important message, which is if you're curious, your life will change. If you just foster that sense of curiosity about a certain place. Where is that country called Ghana? It doesn't mean you're thick. It just means you've never been given the information. That's all, and it's there. And I think that I'm glad you've said that because I've often been hampered by that in life. I've also felt, I'm not great on geography, but naturally I love it. It's just something I haven't had the chance to develop. So yeah, have we got any more questions for Bruce?
Yes, we have. We've got. Right. How can we encourage more shops to have more fair trade goods?
Yeah, that's a good question. See, in the beginning, I remember in the early days of campaigning on the streets in Garstang, the shopkeepers would say to me, well, we would sell the products if people wanted to buy them. And then you talk to the people in campaigning, they'd say, oh, we'd buy the products if we knew where we could buy them from. And it was that vicious circle which we had to crack. So that's basically what we have to do. We have to want to buy more products, and we have to be able to go into shops and tell them. I mean, I used to send my kids in when they were little into the shops and ask them if they had divine chocolate, in Garstang. But so I'm not particularly recommending exploiting your children in that way. But we need to be asking and putting the pressure on people. If they don't have fair trade chocolate, they don't have the thing that you want, ask them for it. But at the end of the day, any decent shopkeeper or any decent company that makes anything, they're going to listen to what their consumer wants. That's what they do. So we have the power.
I absolutely agree with you. In Huddersfield, we set up a group called the Young Ethical Pioneers. And as you know, Bruce, you knew them very well, and Rita helped over in Haworth, and so many people from the Fair Trade campaigning community helped. And a lot of the kids were from Muslim backgrounds, and they had very, very low level awareness of what fair trade was. Now that's changed in recent years. But what they were doing, they were commissioned by Kirklees Council, fantastic, to go and to help her Huddersfield area at the time to become a fair trade town. So they had to go into every single shop in the area and find out how many fair trade products they were. And the kids were educating the adults, and it was fantastic because they only, we gave them a little bit of information, and they soon were arguing, in shops probably with shopkeepers. Why don't you have this and why don't you have that? And we would buy it, and you need to make sure that you think about it. And there was this issue as well, which is, shopkeepers sort of tend to want to, to make them the largest amount of profit that they can, understandably. And then you get into discussions about, you know, profits and how much a fair trade product would cost, but then what was the end cost on society? And it was great. I mean, you're right, Bruce, just getting the family involved to actually question shops and to say how many of you actually got. I think, Olivia, you said before, wouldn't it be great after this session if some of the school children in our area just go to the local shop when it's safe to do so and start nosing around and seeing how many there are these days?
Yeah, definitely. I think we need to get young people involved, don't we? We need to get them sort of excited about it, get them involved. I'm just wondering with the shops and things, if it's a bit sort of like the film from is it from the 90s, Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come. I wonder if you stock the fair trade products, people will buy them, because I think a lot of the time people don't buy them because they don't know what's not there. Yeah. So sometimes I wonder, you need to put pressure on shops to get things so people have the choice to buy them.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? And I think, you know, it's keeping your eye on the ball and making sure that in the classroom, if kids are not getting the information at home, they're getting the information in the classroom as well. And you know, to the pest of power is, you know, why haven't we got anything that's ethical in our cupboards?
Well, thankfully, I know that a lot of schools are doing fair trade things. I know my son's school's they've been learning about fair trade this week, so it's been great. So they've been rooting around our cupboards and things, and it's just nice to get them hooked on it from a young age, isn't it?
It is, definitely. We were fortunate as well. Bruce came as a special guest in Huddersfield. We had the first ever Fair Trade Eid party, which was just wonderful. And you know, it's just that changed a lot of people's lives. You know, I'm still in touch with an awful lot of people from the other parts of town who were involved in that and who remember it very well, and you know, the messages involved in it, because it isn't just about, you know, poverty here on our doorsteps. It's about poverty overseas and how much we have got in common. And we go right back to Joe Cox with that, don't we, Bruce? It's the thing that we keep coming back. We have got, if we can just get beyond the narratives that everybody else imposes on us as well, the world's this way, the world's that way. If we actually meet with people, and what can be better with meeting somebody through fair trade, through the products that we all consume, we find out just how similar we all are.
Absolutely.
Okay. I've got another question that's come in. Great discussion, but where is a fig tree now?
Yeah, that's quite a sad question. Again, it's always been a battle, and the fig tree was in Garstang for 3 years, and then sadly we had to leave Garstang, which was bad enough. We went to Lancaster, which in a way was a good home. We set up in a church called St. John's, which was built out of the blood of slave trade money. So in a way that was quite poignant for us. And we set up there, but we were there for a year making it work, and then we got flooded. So somebody up there was telling us that they didn't want us to have premises. We then started looking for new premises, but we evolved, and that's when I got more into making chocolate. Started to realize that we could make money by making chocolate in my kitchen and trying to sell that, make money to support the enterprise. And that's where we became. So the fig tree still exists as an entity. We've got 50 members now, who fantastic. Thank you to our members who support us. And we do workshops for children around where the children in the classroom make chocolate, and they learn about the farmer who's actually grown the cocoa that goes into it. And also particularly in the Lancaster area, where we have the connection of the slave trade, they learn about the slave trade and the abolitionists and that side of the story. Chocolate and slave trade, they go together. It's a good story. It's a good workshop stuff. So we were still doing the workshops. Of course, COVID's put a stop to the workshops in the schools at the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to bring those back. And we've not been doing stalls, but we're still making chocolate and selling it. And doing events like this now, really. The Fig Tree's been doing a lot of events, virtual events, again, supporting international fair trade towns in Japan or Korea or US or whatever.
Excellent. I think we just time for one more question. Do you want the last question?
Yeah, well, this was a good one that came in from Lucy. Sustainability is a buzzword in our industry, sort of relating to packaging and things. I wondered how this links to the fair trade movement. And we've had an answer on the comments, but I know not everybody can see that. Have you got any thoughts on this? Fair trade packaging and things?
It's interesting because, again, with our chocolate, we struggle with that. This chocolate now, the 40-gram bars, we put it in biodegradable packaging. the biodegradable packaging doesn't look as good as the other packaging. So when we first got it, I used to sell both. And I found that everybody was buying the biodegradable packaging. The thing is, you've got to tell the story. If you just put it on a shelf, and this is the thing with the fig tree, and this is what Christina was talking before about fair trade. When the fig tree selling it, when I'm selling it on a stall, I can tell the story about the fig tree, and I can say this is biodegradable packaging, this one isn't. Which one do you want? And they'll buy the biodegradable one. If, on the other hand, our products were just in the supermarket, and we put out biodegradable packaging alongside a Cadbury's bar or whatever that wasn't biodegradable packaging, people would probably buy the other one because it looks better. And you're not there to tell the story. And that's important with fair trade. And that's why I think the fair trade mark was important, because it enabled fair trade to go mainstream, where you didn't have to be telling the story. When I'm selling fig tree chocolate, it's not got the fair trade mark on, but I can tell the story, so it's fine, and people will support it. When you go into an Oxfam shop and you buy products that maybe don't have the fair trade mark on, but they're fairly traded, you will buy them because you can tell the story. So that's fine if you can tell the story. If you can't tell the story, like on the mainstream supermarket shelves, you need some sort of certification label.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. Something that Bruce and I often chat about. It's the fact that through the work that I do, we have direct links with producers, and we know the issues that are of most concern to them. And time again, it is an environmental issue. You know, with some of them, it might well be how much money they're getting for the crop, but often it is an environmental, you know, drought issue or a flooding issue. And so if people who are buying the products in this country don't hear the stories and the experience of the farmers overseas, which we increasingly don't, we don't know how we can alter our purchasing power to help them, and that's what I think is really important. So it is this storytelling, if you like, isn't it, Bruce, of telling their stories into, you know, quite sophisticated consumers here. But you also said in your book, and this is something that leaped out at me instantly, you know, we are now faced with such powerful multinationals who produce products that constantly have a happy looking farmer on them. How can we discern if that one is, you know, they're getting a fair deal and those ones aren't? It's harder than ever, but I think we now have more information than ever. So there's no excuse to say, well, I don't know, they all look the same, they all look like there's some happy farmer on it. But you're quite right, Bruce. You know, these are the issues that Lucy's mentioned as well. You know, sustainability goes absolutely hand in hand with, you know, the financial remunerance that a farmer gets for a raw product.
Okay, we've got a couple of comments to finish with today. So we're saying, really absorbing session this morning. Thank you. Having schools and children involved is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely.
And then education is so important. Our future consumers as well as business leaders. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
That was from Brad Hill, who used to work with the co-op, and he was a great supporter of all our work in the early days. So thanks for that, Brad.
The co-op movement have been fab.
Okay. Right, so it's just left to say thank you so much to Bruce this morning, and to Chris and Lydia, and everybody watching. Thank you for watching.
And if anybody is desperate to offer this man a publishing deal, you would be crazy not to.
Just before we go, I think Chris wanted to mention next week's.
Yes, sorry. Next week, every first Thursday, we have a writer in residence session, and on the first Thursday, the 1st in April, we're going to be doing a happy session. We're going to be doing a bit of humour, and we're going to be looking at storytelling for people who maybe say, I'm not into reading books, my kids are not into reading books. I'm going to be looking specifically at comics, cartoons, graphic novels, and manga, which a lot of people aren't aware of, but manga has changed our life here for the better. So yeah, we're going to be looking at that. It's going to be a fun, humorous session, but with the serious side, which is, don't assume that because people are not sitting reading a book, they are not educating themselves.
Great.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody, and see you again soon.
Thanks for all your organisation, and thank you, Bruce, for travelling virtually with us on your beautiful halo of light there.
Yeah, girls like sunshine. That's quite a rarity.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.